the house where every clock was a witness. By the time I turned 58, my hands smelled permanently of vanilla and yeast. I wore the scent the way other women wore pearls. It clung to me when I locked the bakery at midnight, when I counted the register twice just to feel sober about numbers, when I walked home alone down our quiet street, where the jacarandas dropped their confetti on the pavement like they were celebrating something I had missed. Inside the house, the kitchen clock, a wedding gift from my mother, who has been gone long enough for her voice to sound like rain, in my memory clicked with a steady patience I no longer had. I used to love that sound. Lately it felt like judgment, like the tiny hammer of a gavel falling on each minute I chose not to see what had always been in front of me. I am a woman who learned to survive by kneading grief until it became bread. I married young before my hair knew gray, and I believed in the liturgy of small promises. I'll be home by 9. I'll save for the down payment. I'll fix the hinge. I love you, Juliet. I'm saying my name here because I need to hear it in my own mouth. Juliet, 58. Baker mother to a firefighter who still calls me on night shifts when the smoke makes his voice hoarse. Wife still technically to a man who has been gone inside the house for a very long time. That night he came in late again with cologne thick enough to pretend the evening had been respectable. He let his keys clatter onto the counter the way men do when they want to sound tired. He kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Don't wait up," as if I hadn't been waiting since we were 22. After he showered, I gathered the trail he always left wallet receipt tie like a loosened apology and set them in a neat pile, because order is the only language I speak fluently when I'm afraid. The receipt blinked up at me, a slick slip of paper with someone else's laughter still wet on it. 2 entrees, a bottle of Cabernet I hadn't tasted in a decade, a city that wasn't the one he claimed on the phone. The date was today, the lie was tonight. There are moments when the body tells the truth before the mind does. My heart stepped back from a ledge. My hands kept moving. I wiped the counter. I poured the tea. I watched the clock. When he started snoring, how quickly men fall asleep after vanishing, I stood in the doorway and studied the face I used to read like a favorite novel, its edges softened by steam and years. He looked harmless. Ghosts often do. It was not one thing, it was an accumulation. A whisper of perfume that didn't belong to either of us. Shirts I hadn't ironed anyway. The way he smiled at his phone with the same small secret smile he used to save for me when we danced in our first kitchen, barefoot, rent late, but music loud. When the email appeared on his screen, my husband hates email. The way he hates kale, it glowed like a bruise. "You were incredible tonight." Dad followed by a heart too red to be innocent. I thought of our son and nearly vomited, but the address wasn't his. The word Dad slid through me like ice. I closed the phone with the gentle hands of a nurse, then leaned on the sink until my breath remembered itself. I did not confront him. Not that night. Fury is hot. Strategy requires a colder stove. In the quiet, I found a number an old friend had pressed into my palm years ago, when she'd watched me laugh at something that wasn't funny anymore. "For the day you need proof," she had said, and I had tucked the paper between recipes as if it were just another ingredient I hoped to never use. The man who answered sounded like every back road I've ever driven, unimpressed by urgency, but efficient. "I can meet you at noon," he said. "Bring only what you know for certain." I stared at my hands still sugared from work and wondered how the same fingers that cradled custard could hold evidence. Morning brightened like a wound. I fried eggs. I buttered toast. I sat across from my husband while he played the part of a good man with his mouth full. "Big day," he said, sipping coffee. He prefers too black. "Maybe home late." I looked at the clock instead of his face and nodded like women nod when their souls are screaming. After he left, I stood alone in the doorway listening to the quiet and understood that silence can be as loud as sirens if you let it. The investigator chose a table in the far corner of a cafe that made the kind of coffee you have to earn. He wore a blue shirt and the expression of a man who has watched many people arrive, pretending not to be broken. I slid a neat folder across to him, receipt, times, dates, a photo of a wine bottle he used to buy me when our love was still learning to breathe. "I don't want to be dramatic," I said. though the tremor in my cup told the truth for me, but I think my life is lying to me. He didn't flinch. I'll call you tonight, he said. Go home and bake something. It helps. Back in the bakery, the ovens made a cathedral of heat. I measured sugar with the precision of a surgeon. I piped custard into the quiet centers of pastries that looked whole from the outside. People lined up with stories about their children, and I smiled with my whole face because I have learned that kindness is a weapon too, the kind that leaves no mark on the skin. When the text arrived, just a single photograph and a timestamp, I braced myself against the fridge and pressed play with my eyes. My husband in a shirt I had folded. The woman with him, mercilessly young hair falling like a curtain over a truth I could no longer afford to ignore. Her hand in the crook of his arm, the easy choreography of two people who had practiced their steps. The caption my mind wrote said, "This is not a rehearsal." I stared until the picture went grainy. Then I breathed. Then I sat down on a flower-slick stool and wiped my eyes with the back of my wrist, like a girl trying not to ruin her mascara. I whispered my name again. Juliet. You are 58, and the owner of ovens that have never failed you. The world is tilting, yes, but the counter is still under your palms. You can survive this, women like you always have. I did not call him. I did not call her. I walked to the window and watched a child press her nose to the glass and point at the custard tarts the way the hungry point at miracles. Something inside me, a narrow bridge of strength, I did not know I had kept held. I turned the open sign to close 10 minutes early and told my assistant I wasn't feeling well. It wasn't a lie. At home, the house waited the way houses do, patient and too full of witness. I stood beneath the clock and listened to its tinny courage and chose for the first time in a very long time myself. I didn't scream or smash anything. I made soup. I chopped onions until my eyes had the excuse they needed, and I let the broth go low and slow, the way my mother taught me when the world felt too sharp. I ate at the counter under the judgment of the clock, and then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the drawer where we kept our important papers and started to count what was mine. Deeds, policies, tax returns in his crabbed handwriting, a car title with my name quietly missing, as if I had failed an exam I didn't know I was taking. I ran my fingers over embossed seals the way you touch a scar you've learned to live beside. In the back behind the warranty cards for appliances that had already died, I found the document that forced my breath to the surface. An equity line I had not signed, the bakery listed as collateral, his signature looping like a flourish after a magic trick. I set the paper down, and the kitchen seemed to tilt the whole house, remembering something it had tried not to say: you have been paying for a lie. I reached for the person in this world who still knows the sound my heart makes. Our son answered on the second ring. From the station, his voice wrapped in the hum of vending machines and men pretending they weren't afraid of what waited beyond the next siren. Ma, he said the way he did when he was 5 and his knees were always bruised. I asked the kind of questions mothers are allowed to ask. Did you eat? Are you sleeping? Are you wearing the stupid sweater I made you because the nights are colder than you think? And he answered with that patient teasing that let me stand just for a moment on a piece of ground that didn't move. I did not tell him. I hid my cracked voice in jokes, and when we hung up I pressed the phone to my chest, like I could keep him small enough to fit there. I thought of the email on his father's screen. You were incredible tonight, Dad, and for the first time all day, I felt something colder than anger, a slick fear that slid under my ribs. There are words that mean two things, and sometimes the worst part is not knowing which one is true. The investigator's next message came near dusk, when the bakery windows were fogged and the last customers lingered over crumbs as if they could postpone the loneliness waiting at home. He sent me an address and a name. She was 27. She had a dog, the kind with a bandana, and a name like a secret. He included a second photograph, neither obscene nor innocent, of my husband standing at a balcony with a view of the city we'd once promised to conquer together. He was laughing with his whole mouth, the way he used to when I said something clever, and he felt lucky to be beside me. I stood there in my apron, sugar dried on my sleeves, and I let the wave go over my head, and trusted it would set me down again. When it did, I called a number I'd been avoiding, a woman who used to share booth seats with me at the diner when our boys were little and sleep was a rumor. She had become a lawyer the year I finally opened the bakery, our lives forked by different kinds of hunger. "Come early," she said, and her voice was a hallway with lights already on. "Bring everything, and Jules, don't warn him." I went home and gathered what a woman gathers when she is building a raft. Bank statements, screenshots I never thought I'd take. The deed my mother's and my hands had signed together, hers, trembling but determined. I found his gym bag in the laundry room, half-zipped, careless with its own certainty, and I unzipped it farther without letting myself think about what I was doing. Inside was a travel kit with expensive bottles he did not buy for me. One of them was vulgar by design, slick and coy as a wink. I stood there, pulse drumming in my throat, and felt a pettiness ride up my spine like heat. Revenge has 1,000 shapes, and some are so small and mean they feel like relief. In the garage, on a shelf with old paint and a coil of extension cords, was a bottle of something that never loosens. Once it takes hold, industrial, unromantic, the opposite of escape. I will not catalog the next minutes or teach anyone how to be cruel. I will only say the cap turned and then turned back, and when my hand started to shake, I saw my son's face at 5 years old, frosting smeared, asking if the cake would still rise if we forgot the eggs. I screwed everything shut. I put the kit back where I found it. I went inside and washed my hands twice, as if what I had almost done could be scrubbed from the record. I slept in the guest room. The sheets there still smelled like last Thanksgiving nutmeg and laughter, and my sister falling asleep with a book tented across her stomach. When he came home late, the door sighed the way doors do when they're tired of carrying secrets. He didn't look for me. I lay in the narrow bed and watched the ceiling fan carve the night into slow pieces and tried to imagine a future where my breath didn't have to tiptoe around his. At some reddish hour, my phone buzzed with a notification from the city's emergency feed, a habit I've kept since my boy took the oath to run toward what others flee. Residential call, possible medical, unknown, entanglement. The address meant nothing to most people. To me, newly literate in the map of my husband's betrayals, it was the building with the balcony and the dog. I sat up so fast the room lurched. My first instinct was not vengeance, but shame. A hot, foolish shame at the thought of my son walking into a stranger's bedroom and meeting his father there in a condition I would not have words for. I did not know what had happened or how. I only knew that whatever private disaster was unfolding had torn the curtain between our lives. I stood barefoot in the hallway, the house's clocks all talking at once, and felt something old and heavy snap. Not my heart, my obedience. I reached for my keys. I reached for my mother's recipe box. I reached for myself. Red and blue light washed the street in strokes, as if some impatient painter were trying to decide what color the night should be. I parked half a block away, palms slick on the wheel, and walked toward the building, with the steady small steps I use when carrying towering cakes, how you move when the thing in your hands will collapse if you let yourself hurry. A cluster of neighbors stood barefoot on the sidewalk, drawn in bathrobes and curiosity. The manager clutched a squealing little dog in a checked bandana. I recognized the dog before I admitted I recognized the balcony above us. Someone had propped the front door open with a yoga mat. I could smell the thin, bright scent of antiseptic and the metallic breath of fear. "Unknown entanglement," a paramedic said into his radio, calm as weather. "Adult pair alert and oriented, requesting additional privacy and assistance for safe extrication." I stared at the line of words as if they'd been written across the night. Unknown entanglement. There are phrases that take care not to say what happened. They build a fence around the truth and hang a quilt over the slats. I didn't need the quilt taken down. I could hear a woman crying through the stairwell's echo. I could hear a man pretending he wasn't humiliated. Inside my ribs, something old wanted to laugh, and something older wanted to fall to the floor and pound it with both fists. Instead, I folded my arms and found the center of myself the way a baker finds the center of dough, pressing lightly until it tells you what it can hold. My son arrived on the second engine visor down face made of business and training. I knew him by his shoulders, by the way he carries his gear like a responsibility he asked to borrow and intends to return in perfect condition. The street bent around him the way streets do for men who run toward trouble. I wanted to step into his path and say, "Not this one baby, not this fire, but I am a mother and I am a citizen, and those two promises rarely kneel to each other." He gave the captain a brief nod and disappeared up the stairs. I stayed outside. I would not let the night use my pain as spectacle. Minutes inched. Radios chirped with a secret language I have learned by heart and pretend not to know. The bandana dog wriggled free and ran a narrow, ridiculous circle at my feet, and I bent to catch it with a hand that wasn't shaking anymore. "It's okay," I told it, ridiculous, soothing for a creature that did not know anything except the scent of its people. I didn't know if I was lying. Somewhere above us, metal clinked, and a voice said, "Got you a thing," my son used to say to me when he would get his zipper stuck, and I'd ease the teeth back to their patient track. A neighbor tried to make a joke he should have swallowed. The manager hushed him. A privacy screen went up at the front door, because decency is a skill, not an instinct. When they finally came down, it was as merciful and as terrible as birth. The woman first swaddled in hospital modesty, shoulders shaking. Then a pause that expanded until it became a wall. And then my husband sheeted to the chest, his mouth flattened into a boy's, only his eyes moving, darting, left, right, left in search of a script. I did not step forward. He found me anyway. Even with the screen, even with his shame, he knew the exact coordinates of my stillness. For a moment, the old choreography tried to start his small shake of the head. "Don't, Jules, not here," and my old reflex to catch what was falling and put it back on a shelf. I tightened my grip on that wriggling dog and gave it back to the manager like a relay baton. "He's yours," I said, and I meant more than the dog. My son emerged behind the gurney helmet tucked beneath his arm, sweat shining like effort on his brow. He did not see me at first because he was still inside his job eyes, scanning for what could go wrong next. Then he turned and saw my hands. He could always find me by my hands, and the shift that crossed his face was a thing I will have to live with, a cliff eroding in real time. He glanced from me to the man on the gurney and lowered his gaze with a quick, practiced mercy, as if the night were a photograph he would not expose. "Ma," he said softly, and his voice briefly held all the years between knobby knees and turnout gear. I put one hand to the air, the sign we made when he was little, for I see you. Do your work. He gave me the smallest nod I have ever received and went to coil a length of hose that did not need coiling. He gave the humiliation somewhere to go. I did not speak to my husband. I did not follow the ambulance. I did not crack into pieces in public the way our marriage had done in private. I went home to a house rinsed in the thin pearl of dawn and made coffee I did not drink. I set the equity line on the table. I opened my mother's recipe box to take my hands off my heart and put them into flour. A card I had never seen before was caught between braided challah and birthday buttercream. It was not a recipe. It was her handwriting, looping calmer than his, with a notarized copy of a trust, my name alone, and a single line across the bottom that made the world tilt in the opposite direction. "If anyone tries to mortgage what Fed you call Linda." I called Linda. "Get here," she said. "Now. Bring the papers. And Jules, whatever you think you owe him tonight, you don't." Before I left, I stood beneath the kitchen clock and listened to its small, stubborn heart. Somewhere a siren bragged its way toward a hospital. I let the kettle wail and then turned it off. I put our wedding clock into a box. I wrote my son a note on the back of a receipt. "At the end of the shift, come to the bakery. We will feed everyone who helped. Bring whoever needs to be reminded that shame is survivable." I left the door on the chain just this once. I walked out into a morning that smelled like rain deciding. Linda's office smelled like legal pads and the steady confidence of someone who has seen storms and built roofs anyway. She wore a navy dress and the expression of a woman who remembers the first lie she ever refused to swallow. I spread my folder across her table and she read silently, lips pressed together, pencil moving like a metronome. When she spoke, the paper grew teeth. The line of credit was a bluff pitched against a wall that wouldn't take a nail. The trust my mother and I had signed, quiet as prayer, loud as a siren, meant the bakery could not be touched. My signature on the new documents was a forgery so ordinary it made me briefly proud of how unoriginal he was. "We'll file an injunction this morning," she said, voice low and sure. "We'll freeze anything that bleeds in your name. We'll move the house into temporary protection and open a separate account for your payroll." "And Juliet, here," she paused. "The way you lean before you lift a heavy cake. The trust wasn't only legal. Your mother left a letter with it. She asked me not to give it to you unless this day came." The envelope trembled like a small bird in my hand. My mother's handwriting stood up straight, the way she did when she was young, and dared aprons to keep her in place. She wrote that love had fed her and betrayed her, and that she'd watched the way my husband counted cutlery at family dinners, the way he smiled at mirrors. She confessed that 10 years ago, when I thought we were merely tight on money, she discovered he had tried to borrow against the bakery while I was in the hospital with a stubborn pneumonia. She paid off the attempt with the secret nest egg from selling her wedding ring after my father's affair decades earlier, and she forgave him then because she could not stand to see me drown in a truth I wasn't ready to breathe. "If he ever reaches for the oven that fed you," she wrote, "slam it shut. Do not apologize for saving your own life." I pressed the letter to my chest and let a sound leave me that I had been carrying since childhood. Some secrets harm because they hide. Some protect because they wait. By noon, the bakery had become a station house of its own. I propped the doors wide and told my staff we were feeding whoever came from the night's call. No charge, no questions, extra cinnamon. Our son arrived last, washed and hollow-eyed, smelling of smoke, and the stubborn dignity of men who have seen things they refuse to let bruise their voices. He kissed my hair and stood there, with a paper cup of coffee he didn't drink, and a quiet passed between us that said, "Later, we will name the pieces." The woman from the balcony sent the manager to return the dog's bandana folded like a flag, and a note that said simply, "I didn't know." I held that pity, like a match, and let it go out on its own. Anger can be a life raft. It can also be an anchor. Mine would not live here. He came in just before closing, carrying the cheapest flowers our corner store sold, and the kind of apology men practice in bathroom mirrors. His wrist wore a hospital bracelet he had not yet cut free. He looked smaller without his certainty, almost kind, like a ruin of something that once held a family. I felt my lungs lift and set down again. He opened his mouth and words came, excuses with ribbon on them, a story in which he had been lonely in a life I thought we were building together. He tried to say the word mistake as if it were a single night instead of a house we had both been living inside. I watched his lips shape the word dad and felt that cold blade slide again, the email's red heart beating in a corner of my memory. I thought of my boy coiling a hose that did not need coiling, giving shame a job so it wouldn't make a scene. I thought of my mother writing with her ringless hand. Linda stepped out from the back with a folder and a face that did not invite negotiation. The investigator stood beside her, hat in his hands, as solemn as a church usher at a wedding you wish weren't happening. Process was served. Precision is its own revenge. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't list what I knew. I only said that the house was no longer his address, that the bakery had never been his, that whatever story he was auditioning for would need a new stage. He looked around the room as if it might prompt him. He asked where I wanted him to go, a question too late by years. I told him the clock above the door had been listening, and time does not testify for men who teach it to lie. He took a step toward me, and the room shifted with him, my staff standing up a little taller, my son's shoulders widening without moving. We stayed soft, and we did not bend. After he left, the air changed. It wasn't triumph. Triumph is brass and shouts and dancing on tables. This was quieter. Relief is a gentle animal when you finally let it into the house. We cleaned slowly. We stacked chairs. I washed my hands and watched the flour make a small cloud in the sink like a ghost deciding to go. My son waited until we were alone to ask the question. He had earned the right to ask. Ma, I told him enough. Not the theater of it, not the worst possible angles, just the truth in its plain clothes. He didn't try to fix it. He put his head on my shoulder the way he used to after scraped knee afternoons, and he let me be held by the thing I made. When he left, he took the wedding clock from the box where I had hidden it and set it on the back counter, not where customers could see, but where I would. "It can witness you now," he said, and I understood he had given it a new job. The divorce moved like winter's slow inevitable, hard to look directly at for long. The forgery case found its own legs and walked where it needed. He called sometimes to practice contrition. I let his apologies pass me like weather. I sold the house where every room had memorized my waiting and bought a little apartment above the bakery where I could fall asleep to the hum of mixers and the warm breath exhale of ovens going quiet. On Sunday mornings, I started a tradition, the free loaf line. Anyone who needed bread could come and leave with a crusty bowl still singing from the heat. Some people told me I was too soft, that kindness had gotten me into this. They were wrong. Kindness didn't get me into this. Silence did. And kindness chosen with my eyes open was how I would get out. I do not have a fairy tale ending to hand you all gilt and ribbon. I have something better, a life that fits. A kitchen that holds both grief and cinnamon. A clock that ticks toward a future I am no longer afraid to enter. I am 58, a woman with vanilla in her hair and the stubbornness of yeast in her bones. I need what hurts until it rises as something that can feed a person. And if you are listening to this with your own house of clocks and your own drawer of papers that make your breath go shallow, hear me. Love is not the same as surrender. Time is not the same as proof. You can walk yourself home. The door will know you. If my story found you at the moment your own courage is starting to warm, stay a little longer. Like, share, and subscribe so more of us can find the words for choosing ourselves. Tell me in the comments where your clock started telling the truth and what you did with that first honest minute. I will read every one with flour on my hands.